your source for long-form videos, deep diving into the struggle of the century. Today, the U.S. is rethinking its trade relationship with China, a country long accused of unfair practices that harm American industries and workers. The recent proposed legislation to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations, PNTR, status could have profound consequences for America, China, and the global economy. Before we begin, if you are interested in long-form videos covering deep dive analysis into the competition between US and China, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. In this analysis, we'll explore the background of this initiative, what the legislation entails, its likelihood of passing, and its potential economic implications for the US and the world. Background: why is this legislation being proposed? Let's look back to the year 2000, when the U.S. decided to grant China permanent normal trade relations, PNTR. At the time, it was like inviting a new neighbor to the community potluck. There was hope that by engaging economically, China would play by the same rules as everyone else. The goal was to encourage reforms, open up China's market, and give American businesses access to 1 billion consumers. It sounded like a win-win deal. Fast forward 2 decades, and many in Washington now feel like that neighbor showed up, took more than their fair share, and didn't follow the same rules as everyone else. For example, American companies like Apple and Boeing have long complained about forced technology transfers, where they had to hand over trade secrets just to operate in China. Farmers in Iowa, exporting soybeans and pork, have seen China play games with tariffs to pressure the U.S. during trade disputes. Meanwhile, Chinese companies, often backed by state subsidies, have undercut American industries, think of the solar panel and steel sectors, by flooding the market with cheap goods. At the same time, there's a growing realization that China hasn't just been a competitor. It's also become a strategic rival. From building a surveillance state to expanding its military influence in the South China Sea, China's actions have raised eyebrows. The U.S. government is asking, are we funding the rise of a rival that could harm our economy and security? It's a little like helping a business partner grow, only to realize they're opening a shop across the street and poaching your customers. And it's not just about big-picture issues. Everyday Americans have felt the effects, too. Small-town manufacturers have struggled to compete with cheap imports, losing jobs and plants that once kept local economies alive. Families shopping for everything from electronics to furniture have seen how reliant we've become on China for affordable goods, but at what long-term cost? So, this legislation isn't coming out of nowhere. It's about lawmakers finally saying, enough is enough. They want to level the playing field, bring back some of those jobs, and stop China from using economic leverage to push its agenda. The question now is whether this tough love approach will be effective or create more problems than it solves. Content: what does the legislation propose? Imagine the U.S. and China as neighbors who agreed to trade goods with minimal taxes thanks to China's permanent normal trade relations, PNTR, status. This arrangement allowed Chinese products to enter the U.S. market with relatively low tariffs, making them more affordable for American consumers. However, concerns have grown that this deal isn't as fair as it once seemed. The proposed legislation aims to revoke China's PNTR status, effectively ending this preferential treatment. Without PNTR, Chinese goods would face significantly higher tariffs, similar to those imposed on countries without such agreements. For instance, the U.S. imposes tariffs ranging from 35% to as high as 100% on imports from nations without PNTR. This means that everyday items like electronics, clothing, and machinery imported from China could become substantially more expensive. To put this into perspective, in 2023, the U.S. imported approximately $427.2 billion worth of goods from China. Applying higher tariffs could lead to increased costs for American businesses and consumers, potentially prompting companies to seek alternative suppliers or pass the added expenses onto consumers. The legislation doesn't stop at raising tariffs. It also targets specific sectors where China has been particularly aggressive, such as technology and rare earth minerals. These materials are essential for manufacturing products like smartphones, electric vehicles, and military equipment. By imposing higher tariffs on these imports, the U.S. aims to encourage domestic production and reduce reliance on Chinese supplies. Additionally, the proposal includes measures to incentivize American companies to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. This strategy, known as reshoring, seeks to strengthen domestic industries and enhance national security by reducing dependence on foreign supply chains. In summary, the legislation proposes revoking PNTR status, ending China's preferential trade treatment, leading to higher tariffs on Chinese imports, targeted tariffs, focusing on critical sectors like technology and rare earth minerals to protect U.S. industries, reshoring initiatives, encouraging American companies to bring manufacturing back home, boosting domestic employment and reducing reliance on foreign suppliers. By implementing these measures, lawmakers aim to level the playing field, protect American jobs, and reduce economic dependence on a country whose trade practices have raised significant concerns. Passage. Will it become law? With Donald Trump re-elected as president and set to take office in January 2025, the proposed legislation to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations, PNTR, status seems to have a stronger tailwind. Trump has been a vocal critic of China for years, emphasizing the need to address trade imbalances, protect American jobs, and push back against what he sees as China's unfair trade practices. His administration is likely to prioritize measures like this as part of a broader agenda to realign the U.S.-China economic relationship. Adding to the bill's momentum, the Republican Party's control of both the House and Senate means a smoother legislative process for initiatives aligned with Trump's policies. Bipartisan support for tougher measures against China further boosts the bill's chances. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle agree on the need to counter China's trade practices, citing examples like intellectual property theft and state-subsidized industries as evidence of a lopsided relationship. We've already seen this legislative mood reflected in recent policies, like the CHIPS Act, which aim to reduce dependence on Chinese semiconductors by incentivizing U.S. manufacturing. This proposed legislation fits neatly into that larger strategy, making it a logical next step. That said, passing the bill won't be without obstacles. Big businesses like Apple, Walmart, and Boeing, heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing or markets, are likely to push back. These companies have significant lobbying power, and their concern is simple. Higher tariffs could disrupt supply chains, increase costs, and hit their bottom lines. For example, during Trump's first term, when tariffs were imposed on Chinese goods, U.S. companies and consumers felt the pinch as prices for everyday products like electronics and clothing rose. Another concern comes from sectors like agriculture, which are heavily dependent on exports to China. Farmers, particularly those in states that voted for Trump, could be hurt if China retaliates with tariffs on U.S. soybeans, pork, or other agricultural products. During the previous trade war under Trump, China targeted these very sectors, leading to significant economic pressure on rural America. Timing is another factor. While the legislation fits Trump's agenda, it's still a balancing act for lawmakers. Some districts will welcome a tougher stance on China, especially those hit hardest by factory closures and job losses tied to offshoring. But in others, particularly farming regions, the risks of retaliation could make this a harder sell. These considerations could influence the speed and scale of the legislation. Finally, Trump's own leadership style could be a double-edged sword. While his administration will likely champion the bill as part of a broader effort to put America first, his history of negotiating deals means there's a chance he could use the threat of revoking PNTR as a bargaining chip to extract concessions from China. Whether this becomes a law or a leverage point will depend on how the administration plays its cards. In summary, the odds of this legislation passing have significantly improved with Trump's re-election and a Republican-controlled Congress. Bipartisan support and a shared recognition of the need to confront China's trade practices make this a priority. However, the pushback from powerful corporations, concerns from agricultural sectors, and the economic consequences of retaliation will be critical factors shaping its ultimate success. With Trump at the helm, the U.S. is gearing up for a bold, aggressive approach, but the road ahead still has its share of challenges. Implications. What are the economic implications for America and globally? Let's break this down by looking at what happens if the U.S. pulls the plug on China's PNTR status. It's like removing the safety net from a tightrope walker. Suddenly, the stakes get a lot higher. For both the U.S. and China, this move would shake things up, not just between the two countries but also across the global economy. First, let's talk about U.S.-China trade. If tariffs go up, everything from Chinese-made TVs to furniture and clothing will become more expensive for American consumers. Imagine buying a basic washing machine that's made in China. Right now, the tariff might be 3% or 4%, but without PNTR, that could jump to 35% or higher. Suddenly, what was a $500 appliance could cost $650 or more. That price hike would ripple across other industries too, from electronics to auto parts, which rely heavily on Chinese imports. For American businesses, particularly manufacturers, this could be a double-edged sword. On one hand, higher tariffs might make Chinese goods less competitive, encouraging consumers to buy American-made products. On the other hand, companies that depend on Chinese components, like car manufacturers or tech firms, could see their costs skyrocket. Remember when Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum in 2018? The higher costs hit industries like construction and automotive hard, with some smaller businesses struggling to stay afloat. Now, let's think about what happens on the Chinese side. China's economy is heavily reliant on exports, and losing preferential access to the U.S. market would hurt. Chinese manufacturers would face declining demand for their products, which could slow economic growth. To offset this, China might look for other buyers, like Europe or emerging markets, but replacing the U.S., one of its biggest customers, won't be easy. It's a bit like losing your top client in business. You can scramble to find new ones, but it takes time and effort. The big wild card here is retaliation. China isn't likely to sit back quietly. During Trump's first term, when the U.S. imposed tariffs, China struck back with tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, like soybeans and pork. This hurt American farmers badly, especially in states that rely on exports to China. If PNTR is revoked, we could see another round of tit-for-tat measures, with both economies taking hits in the process. But the implications don't stop with just the U.S. and China. Globally, this move could disrupt supply chains that have taken decades to build. Think about your smartphone. It's made with components from all over the world, but China plays a huge role in assembling those parts. If tariffs make it too expensive to produce in China, companies might shift production to places like Vietnam, India, or Mexico. That's good for those countries in the long run, but in the short term, moving operations is costly and takes time. You could see delays in production and higher prices for products worldwide. Then there's the geopolitical angle. The U.S. and China have always had a complex relationship where trade acted as a kind of glue keeping things somewhat stable. If that glue weakens, there's a higher risk of conflict spilling over into other areas, like technology or military tensions. The world has seen hints of this already, with disputes over Taiwan and semiconductor technology creating friction. In the end, revoking PNTR is like throwing a stone into a calm pond. It's going to create ripples. For the U.S., the hope is that the long-term benefits, like a stronger manufacturing base and less reliance on China, outweigh the short-term disruptions. For the global economy, it's a wake-up call that might accelerate the shift away from over-reliance on any single country. But make no mistake, the ripple effects will be felt far and wide. Revoking China's trade status isn't just another trade policy. It's a potential economic earthquake. The U.S. aims to reset the balance, protect industries, and reduce dependence on a global rival, but the risks are massive. Higher prices for everyday goods, strained supply chains, retaliatory measures, and a world economy bracing for shockwaves. This decision could upend the rules of global trade and alter relationships for years to come. Whether this bold move strengthens America's hand or triggers an economic standoff or even direct conflict with China, one thing is certain: the consequences will be impossible to ignore.